Welcome to our workshop, AI In+form. It's an interesting way in which we are mixing three ways of AI in a single workflow that at the end of the day can hopefully is going to be really useful for you for digital design purposes. It doesn't matter the scale of if you are in a master or bachelor, PhD, etc. Yeah.
Hi, my name is Provides. I'm currently teaching at the UCL at the Bartlett School of Architecture, and I'm specialized in digital theory and digital design. My specialties include blockchain, BEAM, and AI. I'm also part of the RIA Rational Energy Architects with David and Alberto and Baha on bio-inspired solar designs. So nice to meet you, and I look forward to working with you.
Hey everyone, I'm Davi from and currently based in Brazil. I'm also teaching at the Bartlett at the B-Pro program in the architectural design course under the research cluster 4. I'm also a computational designer at Automated Architecture, and I'm really interested in automation in architecture and how we can use artificial intelligence, computational design, digital fabrication to deal with automation in our context.
That's me. Hi, I'm Nicoletta. I'm a PhD candidate at the Bartlett. I'm also teaching at the DFM at the Bartlett and at Bristol currently as a design tutor. And my work sits at the intersection of biology, material science, simulation, and textiles, and a bit of architecture, which you will see later. That's it from me.
Yeah, bueno, finally, I'm Alberto Fernandez. I'm architect from Chile, a Mac from UCL, as well a PhD candidate in architecture and digital theory in the same school. I'm teaching as well there. I'm a practitioner for sure, and hopefully these days are going to be amazing for all of us.
Cool. It wouldn't be long. So basically, you're going to hear 15 minutes from each of us. So then you can understand a different perspective to this workshop. So as you can see, this is about AI In+form. And these are some of the works that we have produced with participants in previous conference workshops. And we will introduce more. So always remember, there are three core ideas. It's solar design, bio-inspired form finding, and human-machine interaction. That's the three goals that we try to achieve. And then we're also trying to find what is happening in between. And this is a chaotic system. So the reason why we have to redesign solar designs is because, as you can see, we are using mainly silicon flat panels. And what this means is that you have to maximize service, and that create a lot of problems. Like, for instance, if we plant solar farms from afar locations, first, it's in direct competition with vegetation. And then second, basically means we have to transport energy from really far. And then that causes like more entropy in a system. And also, if we look into nature, you can see that, for instance, corals, each of them develop a different topology while adapting to each other to win over all kinds of solar factors, because the sun is not static. So our design also shouldn't be static, but as opposed to like using motors or other systems that actually consume more electricity, can we actually overcome this problem through design? So yes, our interest is in diversifying solar design, right? So more options for more different users. But then why do we need AI when the sun is so predictable? We can basically predict how the Earth is going to circulate around the sun for the next 1,000 years. And that's also something that we want you to remember, is that one of the goals is to decentralize. If we're saying that everyone should be able to have their own solar designs and then should be able to generate their own electricity, then it means that we can embed more solar devices in the city. And it's not just for humans, it's also for buildings, in the sense that every building has a different topology. They're situated differently in the urban context. So solar design should also be different, feed it to the context. So one of the things that we're going to do with you is to locate your unique context, so then we can design uniquely for that context. So this has, although we're working in the speculative, but we also believe that this is not a fiction, in the sense that it will be realized, maybe not the next year, but in 5 to 10 years. As we can see around the world, including the UK government, the Hong Kong government, what they do is that they do this fit-in tariff program. They try to incentivize individuals to have solar panels installed on their buildings. But then we're saying that the scale can actually go a lot smaller. We can even have devices just all over our windows or on the cell phone. And you would also understand why this can be enabled in 5 to 10 years because of material advancements. But before that, let's a small introduction to how we're thinking about our algorithms. So there are two types of algorithm that we're using. First one is rule-based systems. Second one is machine learning. And then basically we're going to combine bio and parametric, cellular automata, and genetic algorithm for form finding as rule-based. But then we're going to teach the machine. So then, as you know, AI needs a lot of training. So where does the data set come from? Who is going to teach the AI to actually learn? So that's how we relate the rule-based system to the machine learning. Initially, human is sort of going to teach the rule-based system, which is going to teach the machine learning. So as opposed to us drawing 200 images to train the machine, we're going to utilize a rule-based system to draw the data set. So that's how we formulate the human-machine interaction. This pipeline, it's also your schedule. As you can see that on day one, which is today, we're going to be doing the research and the context and like download all the data set you need for solar environment. On day two, we'll be doing the modeling with Nicole, Baha, and Alberto using Houdini, Rhino, and Grasshopper. On day three, Alberto is going to talk more on how we're going to optimize with the solar data that we've collected. And then on day four, we're going to focus on the machine learning, which David is also going to be talking about more. And then we proceed to final optimization. But one thing you should always remember that in this workshop, we're going to work in teams, because as you can see from the range of algorithms and skills they have to master, it's never a single task. And you can also see that we are also working in teams. So then naturally you would find the kind of algorithm or software that you feel most intuitive and embedded yourself into. And then you have to divide your task amongst a team of 4. So you will know everything, but then which software space is you taking your master in is your choice. Yeah, so we've gotten to the part where why we think that diversifying solar design is going to happen in the next 5 to 10 years. It's also because of the scientific advancement that we see. So this thing here is called a carbon nanotube. Even without it, a lot of thin film technologies are being produced. How they do it is that basically they can spring coat a very thin layer on materials, which means that our form can basically be more diverse than just a flat panel, right? But then we're interested in the intermediate to macro scale, meaning how do we actually take these technologies, find a form that's more suited to how energy circulate within these materials, and then we'll also apply algorithm to look at how this can be coupled with actual architecture. So just a last few brief introduction in what kind of materials we have, which is something that you don't necessarily have to do extensive research, but it's good for you to have a basic understanding to understand why you're doing a certain form. So overall, solar design is based on photovoltaic technology, and then there's 2 types. One type is what we're using right now, which is the wafer-based. What they do is that they fabricate the silicon in chunks, and then they're going to slice it into thin slices, and then they put it over a base material. So that's what you see right now. But we're more interested in thin films in the same type that I was describing, meaning they can be flexible. Some of them can even be transparent. Some of them don't even have to tie to electrical generator, in that it can absorb light in the daytime and re-emit it in low lighting conditions. And then, for instance, in terms of bio-inspired form binding, we can even be inspired by the form of the material. So the carbon nanotube that I've mentioned before, this is the microscopic view. So that's what it looks like. And then it looks a lot like the bioform that we have, because some of them are organic and non-organic material, also learning from nature. So we're trying to say that we carry out the same structure from a very, very nano state all the way to the macro. And just a few examples for you to see, like this one is based on the strange attractors, which is a chaotic system that we find in nature. And then we generate a self-standing form from it. And at the same time, because it's thin film, meaning that we can take it down and then rebuild it at any place. So this is like a circular economy. And then some of the research we've done before with participants, for instance, form finding logic with a flock system and how we distribute such flock system within an urban space, as opposed to taking the generative form as a static shape. It's actually a way to distribute components within some space. So this is the final slide that I have, which is basically telling you that all of your result is going to be exhibited in a web VR gallery. So then we're going to have parties there, and then you can also look at previous results, and other guys can also look at your results. Yeah, so as you can see, for instance, this one is the flock system that absorbs light in the daytime and re-emit it at night, and a whole range of other design. It's also interactive, meaning a lot of people, you can bring your friends and families into the space. So that's all from me. If you have any, yeah.
There's something more. They received just an email from Digital Futures organization, and they are going to select the best results from every workshop for an exhibition as well, a virtual exhibition. So it's a double deal for you.
Yep. Cool. So now we're going to get into machine learning.
Yes.
Okay. All right. So I just want to talk a little bit to you guys about one of the aspects of artificial intelligence that we'll be diving into. But first, what is artificial intelligence? I mean, it's a concept that we hear a lot about. So I think it would be nice to have some, it's a word that we hear a lot about, but it's not a concept that is so clear and straightforward to understand most of the times. So what is it? Well, artificial intelligence is most of all a scientific field. It's not like an entity, a digital entity, as it might seem to be, but it's more like a scientific field of study. And it's focused on studies that try to create digital algorithms to solve problems that are often associated with intellectual labor, even if that's human or bio-inspired. And it's not necessarily accomplished by imitating humans. And AI involves machine learning, involves cellular automata, and other concepts that can be applied to achieve, that are used inside the scientific field. So that said, what is machine learning? So machine learning is the study of computer algorithms that are not explicitly programmed to do something, but they learn and improve automatically through experience, trial and error, using most of the times data samples to learn from. And well, it's not like when I say it's non-explicitly programmed, it means that it's not like a if-else statement kind of program that you would do traditionally. Like if you have an input, you choose, you check for if it meets a certain condition, and if it meets this certain condition, it does something in particular. Well, machine learning doesn't operate like that. That's why it's hard to program it. That's why it is used on situations when you cannot clearly determine how to achieve a certain goal. So it's kind of like when you don't know how to program it, that's when you should use machine learning. If there is another way to do something that thing that you know it works, you know how to program it, machine learning doesn't seem like a good fit for that situation. So that said, the kind of machine learning that we are interested in this workshop is the one that uses neural networks. And neural networks have this name because they work kind of like your neurons. They work like a group of nodes, as we can see here, that connect to each other. And through these connections, they there are parameters that determine how these nodes that are similar to neurons are connected, when they are fired, and it's by learning when to fire these nodes, these neurons, that the machine learns. So in the pix-to-pix kind of environment in which we're using images as data that is being processed through the network, what you see here is that through each layer on this diagram, the data gets more and more refined to a certain extent in terms of its characteristic elements being more and more finer, for the lack of a better term, and every through every layer, the characteristics that are important for the neural network become more and more clear, and they can be used to generate something else in the output. So yeah, I mentioned pix-to-pix, and it has been mentioned before in this presentation. And this is the algorithm of choice that we will be using for the machine learning part of this workshop. And pix-to-pix is a conditional generative adversarial network. It is a CGAN that does image-to-image translations. So as you can see here on this video, you have an input that is one kind of image that contains one kind of kind of like one style of image. Like here on the left, you have a hand-drawn drawing of a face. And what pix-to-pix does here is it attempts to translate what you have as an input to a particular output. It is kind of a type of style transfer in which you're transferring one style of an image to another. You're translating one image to another. And yeah, that's what the algorithm does. And we have seen in recent times the use of machine learning in architecture, particularly through examples that uses GANs, that uses generative adversarial networks that learn how to generate an image, but they do not relate to an input. And this is you have this example from Stanislas Chailloux. Is quite well known from this animations that he did. Here he's using a GAN. So he has an algorithm that has learned how to generate plants, basically. And what we are interested, and this is where pix-to-pix comes in, is how can we use a data that we already have, like we have a situation and we want to translate this into something else. So we have an input and we want to translate it into something else. And this is why pix-to-pix becomes important. So the structure of the algorithm is like this. Here on the left, you have when you're training, you have an input pair. It's like a pair that represents what you have and what you want, right? And you want the machine to learn, okay, if you see this, make this. If you see something like this, make something similar to this other thing. You see this output, give me this target. If you see this input, give me this target output. And the way that it does it is by using two internal models, two kind of algorithms inside of it that compete one against the other. It's similar to again, if you have seen one before, but it uses the image pair instead of just one image. So what happened is when you show the input to the generator uses all of the connections, all of the nodes that I've shown you before to try to generate something, right? And for the discriminator, you show it two images, and you tell it, okay, if this is the input, this other one is the expected target, is the expected output. So what it does is it learns when an image is an actual good image, like a true image, or when it is false, it has been generated by the generator. So by pairing these two models together, one is trying to convince the other, the generator is trying to convince the discriminator that it has made a good image, a good output, and the discriminator is trying to tell if the generator did it or if it is an actual image. And by pairing them together and training them through several epochs, we can have a model in the end, a generator in the end, that is able to make a good translation between one image to the other. So to discuss it in an example, I want to share with you guys this project that used pix-to-pix for spatial recognition. So imagine here, I guess you can see my mouse, right? Yes? Okay, thank you. So here on top, we have this image that represents a series of components in a floor plan that are arranged in a space, and we want to know how how can we separate the spaces in this image, which is something that might sound simple, but it's not so simple to do programmatically. It's something that uses a lot of human intuition. So the way that this project did spatial recognition is, okay, we have this image, me as a human, as an architect, I go there and I draw these red lines that for me represent where the spaces should be separated in this configuration. And I fit this into pix2pix and in order for the algorithm to learn how to draw those red lines. And if you check this diagram, you can see that we have a configuration of these components in 3D space, actually in voxel space, which we're using voxels as a 3D unit. And so we translate this data into a 2D data, into pixels, basically. We feed this into pix2pix, so pix2pix can generate those red lines for us. And we use this information in 3D again to say, okay, this is a space, this is another space, and this is another space. And we can use this. Oh, and in order to do it, we need to produce a training set. So a training set has to be produced manually, kind of, right? You produce an image, the architect or the human goes in there and draw the red lines. In other words, embeds their biases in terms of how they perceive a space, and output this training set. Output this training set for the model to learn from. And here you can see a series of outputs from the trained model. So bottom line is we can use pix2pix by the way that we produce our training set to embed an intuition, to embed a bias that is important for us in a generative pipeline, which is something that we're really interested in this workshop. And okay, we have another example here. So in this other example, we have a series, we're trying to bring this idea of pix2pix to 3D space. So what is going on here is that a model was trained on gesture biases and learned how to connect dots in images. So you have one, the training set was super simple, just shapes, and you would draw manually connections between these shapes. That's it. And what happened here is that this model was used on this voxel space, again, in this tower that you can see here in the beginning, like this void kind of tower. And these black pixel or black voxels are the ones that need to be connected in 3D shape, in 3D space. So what you see here at this point is that every layer was turned into an image, and this image was passed through pix2pix to generate the connections between those two. So every green yellowish voxel that you see here, those are the ones that have been generated through pix2pix. So this is a way of like, how can we get this model that works on 2D data and make it 3D? It's kind of like 2.5D, let's say. But it's a way that we're also interested into getting into 3D machine learning. And this is like one possible output that of that algorithm. So, okay, so in terms of our pipeline for the project, what we really want to do is we want to use pix2pix as a way to get a really complex pipeline, a really computer-intensive pipeline, and use a model that can understand how can we generalize to a certain extent, obviously, this pipeline. So in the projects that you guys will be developing, we will have a location and a context, like a series of buildings, and you have solar data associated with this context, and you will be producing projects that will respond to this environment, to this context, to this location, to this data, and will be also optimized to respond to the local conditions, right? And you will also use generic algorithms. It will use generic algorithms for optimization, but also cellular automata for the production of these forms. And these are all really computer-intensive processes. So, and if you want to do something more than one project or a couple of projects, it becomes super hard, right? It becomes super heavy to run. And what we want to do is, how can we take this process that is super heavy and make it into one algorithm, into one pix-to-pix model that can, if it sees a context, if it sees one kind of data that represents an input, how can we generate and understand all of the process and give us a usable output? We will go into the details of the pipeline later and also through the week, but just keep in mind that the idea of like how we're using machine learning here is to automate a process, is to understand a process through machine learning and automate it to make it more kind of generalized and easier and faster to run and use.
Okay, so cellular automata and aggregations. Well, firstly, as you hear before, CA or cellular automata is a kind of AI manifestation, or a kind of artificial intelligence that was developed from the 40s till now. It was developed in the mathematical field from two mathematicians, John Boyd Neumann and Stanislav Ullmann, that at the end they were trying to define a physical simulation system, yeah, using a discrete environment as subdivided in just zeros and one, or black and white. So trying to achieve the idea of the minimum set of possible elements organized, trying to create the most optimal possible shape. Okay, it's starting with a initial cell named seed. So it's a starting point, and this starting point is starting to aggregate cells around itself, following a set of rules that at the end can create a quite unique pattern of based on aggregation logics. But at the same time, throughout the interaction between seeds, it's possible to understand a behavior behind all these systems. So when we are talking about behavior, or when we are talking about structures emerging from a CA, or in this kind of artificial intelligence system, we are talking about a memory, a visual memory of something that this seed create throughout time in a generative process. So four main concepts that are embedded in CA are these ones. Firstly, is coming the idea of neighborhood. So one cell is not about the cell alone. It's a cell working and understanding a neighborhood as the way to create a new structure that is responsive to something more. It's not just about in terms of designing something isolated. Using CA or CA logics, a designer can create something quite coherent with the environment. Then the second interesting concept behind a CA is this based on a discrete system. So we have a system that is aggregated in a quite simple logic of geometrics in a X, Y, and Z coordinates. So we have an object, we have the possibility of this as a voxel, for instance, and this voxel contains a limited set of possibilities to be aggregated to the next one. And in that way, we are understanding that CA is trying to find throughout the discrete system, find the most optimal possible way to be aggregated to the next one. Because if you remember the first step with the neighborhood, first is reading the neighborhood. Then it's reading the possibilities of the system, which rules are working there for in terms of aggregation. Then the third concept is the abstraction, because at the end, with CA, we are creating a simplification of a complex problem. But this simplification doesn't mean that we are losing data. No, we are selecting a specific set of data to be used for this simulation. And then the fourth concept for this cellular automata idea is dynamism, because everything is running in a generative process, time by time. Every generation is incrementally more complex than the previous one. And at the same time, throughout the aggregation, throughout this idea of generativism, we can create complexity based on simple rules. And this complexity at the end can simulate without problems several possibilities of coming from the nature, like corals, for instance, or as well like cities, if you want. So this is the elementary cellular automata that is working in one dimensions, but this is trying to imagine this as a set of squares that can work just understanding this idea. We have a set of rules, of set of possible combinations in the working for this environment. Then we have an environment, which is in this case this set of squares in white. Then the seed, the first cell that is starting the CA as a first foundational step is reading what is going on beside the itself. So I have two boxes beside me as a cell, and then I'm understanding, okay, my neighbors are in white. So if my neighbors are in white, then the rule that I must follow according to my instructions is this one. Okay, I can create a new black box. So what if, for instance, I have one white neighbor and a black neighbor? Okay, in that case as well, I can create another black. But if I have two black neighbors, trying to imagine these two boxes in black, so the next instruction could be or must be white. So in certain way, it's a system that is conditioned by rules, and is conditioned as well by what's going on around itself. And then if you understand that if we have more than just one seed, if we have a collection of seeds working simultaneously in the system, okay, that means that they are interacting between itself or between themselves as well, just throughout the neighbor, because the neighborhood is the way in which they are communicating what's going on for the next step. So in this case, this simple rule can create after 20 generations this pattern, which is by far more complex than the first one, which you remember, this one. And for sure, if you try to understand the logic behind this, maybe if without knowing this set of rules, you can't understand what's going on here. So it's super important in this way that maybe a CA is a way of materializing a way of thinking based on aggregations and based on rules instead of a predefined shape. So you can discover a shape after testing different possibilities of combinations working in your design process. So as well, we can you can work in a 2D environment, and okay, based on the same logic, but in a not just run down. If you can run as well left, right, and up and down, you can create different shapes, just activating or deactivating this set of possibilities that you can find in a way. And as well, you can create more complex patterns like these ones. So in certain way, these shapes are emerging as a final manifestation of between the dialogue of these cells in this two-dimensional discrete space. So in certain way, it's a little bit complex because you must test and test and test and try and try and try. Sometimes it's working well like this in this example, but in other cases the system is working more in a quite boring way. Let's say class 1. We have 4 classes in CAs. Class 1 is the one in which you can find an homogeneous pattern after few generations, and then all the set of possibilities is in certain way is collapsed, huh? And then you can find just an homogeneous pattern, in this case a black one. Then you have a second possibility that you can find during your design process, which is the class 2, in which you can, after few generative steps, you can see a periodical behavior, which means, okay, I have a step that is going to be repeated several times forever. That is this behavior has been classified sometimes in the CAM idea as a highway, which is okay. It's a long and thin path, completely homogeneous, but left at the same time few spaces in between. It's not like the first one. Here you have a linear pattern at the end. It's like a barcode, if you want to understand it in that way. Then you have a third class, this one, and this one is a little bit more interesting because here you can see precisely a more like a dialogue between cells. So each cell at the end is creating a neighborhood in a genetic way, and at the same time, this neighborhood is negotiating space with the other neighborhood, with the other seed, and that is super interesting because here you are visualizing the idea of a complex system in a structured way, working as a visual intelligence. And then, the fourth one is the class 4, the complex one, because in certain way, the class 4 can mix the 3 other classes all together. Here you can find homogeneous patterns. Here you can find highways. Here you can find this idea for neighborhoods that are negotiating, and all together in the same environment, in a quite diverse way. So usually, well, it depends on what you want to do or what you want to achieve in your design. Usually, it's harder. It's harder to define something like this. But in any case, it's up to you. What do you want to achieve according to the necessities that you are detecting in your design problem? But this is just at the end. I'm going to return. Is starting just with this concept. So from simplicity, we are creating at the end complexity in a visual structural dialogue. Then, for instance, we have the Conway's game of life, one of the systems that we want to use in this workshop as a 2.5D stacking system. And then here we have a dialogue between neighbors in a quite dynamic way. So this belongs to the class 4 behavior at the end. So we can find highways. We can find as well a quite dense system. We can find as well homogeneous patterns and for sure voids in between. And one of the possible manifestation in this 3D stacking system is this one, that it looks like a coral, and at the same time is a quite efficient in terms of a structural way. Every single cell is supporting the next one, and here you can appreciate these highways in a 3-dimensional way. You can appreciate some growing patterns. You can appreciate all together, but in a 3D system. So now we have a video. Let's see if it's working. Yes, it's working. This is from one example of the CA applied to one of the design from the previous workshop that we developed. So the CA was the initial starting point. Then the CA idea was connected with the radiation pattern from the site. And with that, at the end, the participants were able to create this genetic algorithm throughout Galapagos, which is another kind of AI system. And the result was by far more complex than the rules that they were applying at the beginning. So this is what we want to achieve in certain way using CAs and aggregations as a form finding tool, as well as a methodology by which we can translate data from the environment, in this case, solar radiation, throughout to a more complex shape. And then later, with this complex shape, we can create something new.
Okay. So bio-inspired form finding. So my work is actually a bit different. You'll understand in a bit, but I use inspiration from bio-inspired form finding in terms of looking at organisms in nature or natural patterns and how they can be applied as a form finding process, but also using the material, the organism itself to look at how it grows or work with it and fabricate things. So I'll take you through one of my working examples that uses hydrogel, programmable hydrogel with infused algae, and looks potentially at one way of how can we start fabricating those complex shapes. So this one is, I'll take you through the making process just because it's quite interesting. So we use, I use algae, Solidium alginate that is found on the cell of algae, and then I also use chitosan, which is something that makes the hydrogels a bit more kind of a bit more strong to work with. And these are also diluted within water, and then they are with calcium chloride. You have to kind of put everything in calcium chloride to get your yarn. So this is a bit of the process. So you mix everything together. If you can see my mouse, then you can use a syringe, or you can use robotically extrude the hydrogel, and then you infuse it within the calcium chloride solution, and you have the yarn. And as part of that, then it is in this specific project, it is also infused with different consistencies of algae, living algae. And then as the days grow, the algae grows as well, as you can see here. And it's quite interesting to see that in the end, depending on how the algae is, depending on how the textile is situated and how it receives light, some parts would die or some other parts would flourish, which you can see here. So initially, if you remember from the first image, you have kind of a very structured algae gradients, but now it kind of all starts growing in different parts. And actually, you can start controlling potentially with how the radiation goes into the textile, in which direction they would grow more or less. And I think this is more of a kind of a speculative part of the project of how could we potentially start creating those soft structures or those soft or those intricate form finding processes into structures that could be attached into buildings or could be self-standing, depending on the context that you use. And also this is from, again, a UCL project that they use robots to extrude the hydrogels. So then we can start scaling up things, and you can see the process of how not only I use it in terms of a textile and of a yarn, but also you can start seeing it as an extrusion method, as a layer by layer. And then again, that's how you can achieve very intricate forms other than the very flat solar panels. And also this is an example, I mean, currently it's just used for organ transpulse, but it's again a stereolithography printing method that again, you can start seeing how we could potentially start printing those structures. So within, I think potentially tomorrow, some of the form finding methods that we might be using, and sometimes I use them as well in terms of form finding or patterns within the textiles. these are all based in Houdini. So we can start looking at using noises as a way to manipulate point clouds. And noises in particular, there are different types of noises that, depending on the ones we're going to use, they kind of relate with different patterns, their nature. So some of them might look more like cells, some of them might look more like diffusion limited aggregation systems, or like soft kind of growing bodies, and then how that can get translated within a mesh. And actually what is quite nice also with a point cloud system is that you can imagine that if you had, once you have your site, you can create, or even if you had a point cloud of your site, you can be very, very specific on at which parts your structure would go or how things would get connected, or looking at potentially sort paths, so how you can start connecting the elements in the shortest way, in the shortest path. Also, potentially looking at how we can have an initial 3D shape converted to a point cloud, and that cloud, that points, then we can create individual components that then would be applied back to the point cloud. And then again, with noise, it can be further manipulated depending on the site conditions. And finally, here we have particle simulations, which again, depending on the time, we might be able to see. So again, working with points, animating those points and giving them specific directions depending on wind, on gravity, on attractor points. And also, I think another idea that would be quite interesting is also creating or looking at creating the mesh or the skin that, again, we can think about it as a potentially soft or not soft skin that attaches or it sits in between buildings. And finally, here there are just some examples of some of the form finding exercises that result from those processes. And that's me.
Okay, so a brief intro to the mirror board. You can find the schedule, what you're going to do every day here. And then we'll be updating each other with the progress in this workspace. For any information that you need, all the links that we've talked about, we'll post it in here. You can also kind of understand what we will do by looking at previous workshop results. The web VR gallery is here. And all these things you'll receive from us as a gift from the workshop. Tempting. And we have also invited guests from world-renowned architectural firms, including Zaha Hadid, the 3 panelists to review all of the projects on the last day. And then we'll select the best project. If you want to get in touch with us, also follow our Instagram. So in terms of logistics, now we have come into the part where we're going to start the research on the context, identify a site, and then start thinking about what kind of organisms you want to model behind. Because as you can see, both Cellular automata working in Rhino and also Nicole's Houdini skills can get you to a coral. We will also work out with you which software is perhaps better for your team and your ideas to actually be native in. How you're going to be into teams is that Zoom and its algorithm is going to decide who you're going to team with. And you should also know that everyone is based in different cities, but you can learn how to work with time zones. For instance, if one guy is sleeping, the other guy can be working, or if everyone is awake, you can work together. So like, don't be stressed about this, okay?
It's like us, indeed.
Yeah.
When Provides is sleeping, I'm working, and then when Davis is working, I'm sleeping. It's always the same. You must be super connected with all this workshop, because at the end, it's a nice opportunity to visualize what you want to do for the future of you. Because at the end, if you think we have a pipeline, but that pipeline is not quite strict in terms of what more you can add to as knowledge, as digital design knowledge. So we have some fixed things in between, like for instance the Ladybug part, the aggregative part, or CA, or the machine learning with part. But then you can realize that it's quite possible to add in between more things from your own background. That's super. We want that. We did that before in the previous workshop with nice results, because at the end we don't want the same project every time from every single participant. No. We want diversity, and at the end, the unique way in which we can achieve that is from your background.
I think maybe we can also take 5 minutes for some quick questions if anyone.
Yes. Yeah. This part is by far really complicated.
And there are no stupid questions.
So one question, David.
Yeah.
Yes.
Are we gonna create this data for training the machine learning model?
Yeah, we will.
If you remember the pipeline diagram, at the end, all the components that we are going to teach during the next days are going to produce a set of images for the machine learning part, for the pix-to-pix engine. And with that, we want to automate this complex process in a quite straightforward way for newer future developments.
Can I ask something? I know this is focused on solar design, but would you say that the same process can then also be applied with water studies and such stuff as well?
Yes.
Yeah.
Sorry, I'm so excited. That was actually our next attempt. But yes, very intuitive.
Yes, indeed. Now we are working with this solar radiation engine, but with the fluid dynamics, it's a little bit more complicated in terms of computational power. It's not knowledge, it's power. When fluid dynamics is using a lot of more resources in your computer, but it's the next step that we want to follow for the next workshops.
Yeah, and in terms of this kind of machine learning and this kind of algorithm, such as pix-to-pix, it's more like automating a process, right? So it can be, as in the example, like the first example that I showed you, that was like how to get from a drawing of a face, a human, realistic kind of representation of a human face. And so yeah, it's more like, what I think it's really important for you guys to see this from the perspective that is more interesting for you to see this from, is that it is a way to automate a process. And especially it is a way that you, when you are producing your training set, when you are creating the data that the algorithm will learn from, how can you embed particular characteristics, right? Because in the machine, because I mean, bias is a problem in artificial intelligence, especially when you're dealing with social interactions and human data, but it can also leverage other characteristics when you apply it into design. So you can embed your bias directly on purpose into the algorithm, so it can do something in a particular way that you desire it to do.
I wanted to ask one thing. So like, is it just images that we are using to get those data, or this, like, can we have any other replacement as in data, wherein we are looking for some output instead of images?
For this model in particular, it deals with images, right? If you're asking in terms of like machine learning itself, no, you can use kind of any data that you want, but I mean, it's up for discussion, because 3D machine learning is still kind of like something under development. It's still something that is kind of like a boundary. So if you're asking if you can like input a model and get a model out of it, it's not with this particular algorithm. And it's also something really, it's a field of active studies that are going on. So it's not so easy yet to achieve something like that in 3D.
Why did you ask the question? Did you ask about 3D, or you're asking about no images?
No, I'm asking about no images. Like instead of
no images.
Yeah.
Why did you ask that?
No, I was just trying to understand, like, is it just images that we are using, or there is something more we can also use?
Well,
so,
but just try to think something. At the end of the day, we are in a computer working with images, but the images are a representation of data in RGB information. So it's just a manifestation. It can be visualized with this data.
I mean, but I think something also unique in this workshop is that even though we use image as an instruction to help the machine to learn, but then we're not taking image as like a inspiring random image. As opposed to that, we're using that image as an instruction for the machine to learn how to distribute. So it's in a way, it's not really images. It can really just be like zeros and ones. Like one is play something there, zero is don't play something there. But then it's easier for us to just like communicate as designers with the machine if it's just like color coded. So yeah.
Exactly. Yeah. In other algorithms, you can use text. You can use maybe map data. But as Bro said, and as Alberto said, it's just a medium for data to be conveyed, basically.
I had a question about the cellular automata. My question was, can we create a 3D actually space and then do that neighborhood rules in data space? I mean, what you showed was actually 2D, and then it kind of aggregated from that, and then it went up. My question was like, we can make a set of rules for that.
Oh, sorry, I had a problem with the last part of your question. Can you repeat it again, the last part?
Yeah, my question was that can we create a point cloud like what was shown at the end, something like that, that it can be in any shape, and then we aggregate all those cells in that point cloud and then see what happens? I mean,
yeah, it's a possibility, but it's for the objective of this workshop, we want to work with the 2.5 instead of the proper 3D CA, just because under my experience, because I'm working with the 3D CA as well, you have more control in a 2D layer, and then with the stacking system, you can recreate something more coherent instead of the 3D one. The 3D one is in certain way is a little bit more complicated if you want to create something with more diversity. Yeah, your lines of coding for sure are going to be larger. Trust me, and for your computer, sadly we don't have too much time. But then later, if you understand the same logic with the same pipeline, you can replace that with a proper 3D. But for that purpose, we are at the same time we are using the GhWasp engine, which is a 3D aggregated system, a proper 3D aggregated system, as part of the pipeline, because at the end of the day, that part could be as well replaced with a 3D CA in the future if you want. Yeah, but it's just for that purpose, because trying to imagine that we have 1 day for that. Indeed, 4 hours. So yeah, so we need to be super effective in what we want to teach you. But I insist, we have a pipeline, we have several things running in between, but you can replace later every part if you want. You can add, you can modify, you can reconnect, etc. But the pipeline is the important thing from the workshop.
I mean, regarding your question about whether we can use CA to create a space, I can tell you that we have a lot of students at Bartlett who is like looking a lot into CA and then just like generating direct space with it. But then because the guy who actually invented CA also say it's kind of a dead end in a sense that if you don't think about how it's used as an instruction, then you always generate very similar aesthetics because it's one algorithm, right? That's why we're not generating direct space with the algorithm, but we're generating instructions with the algorithm. So with all the voxels or point clouds, you can replace it with other geometries, and then it becomes more complex forms.
Thank you.
Yeah, indeed. Another thing, because it's, you will see this in the next days. We are using this workshop as a small plugin from Grasshopper for CA, which is already working with the Game of Life, but the definition, the starting definition, the starting point, the starting seeds are controlled in the case of this workshop from images as well, from these radiance patterns, or can be controlled by some restrictions based on lines or based on different shapes that you can create as neighborhood. And in that way, you can create something different, because without that restriction, it's not possible. You can create always the same shape, because the main problem with CA, if it is working alone, at the end, it can create an homogeneous pattern. But working with this restriction, these constraints in 2D only, it's possible to create something different later. Or more diverse.
Any other questions? You can even just ask something like, what are we even doing? You know, it helps us to understand how we can help, or like get inside your brain a bit more. It's about communication, right?
this is the next part. So
Yeah.
share screen again.
Thank you for your questions, guys.